We are now all working in the post-COVID era, and hybrid working has become the norm. But what are the things you need to make sure you get right so that your organization and business can have the best productivity for you and your team? Well, we've identified 4 things. They are team training, hardware, your workspace setup, and additional cloud tools to make sure that everything's running swimmingly. And in this video, I'm going to share with you all the details on how to make sure you and your team are working right for this year moving forward. So we're now in a post-COVID era, and it's not just enough to get by with your team just working from home. I mean, what we saw is when the pandemic first hit, everyone just kind of sent everyone home, and everyone just logged onto Zoom and tried to work the same way that they had worked previously. But you'd know, especially from the first few months of productivity drop with your team, that doesn't quite work. We're also seeing the longer-term effects of the way that work is actually done shifting now with teams working from home. And in our business, we've been working from home for over 6 years, well before the pandemic hit. So we've got some good tips to help businesses like yours navigate how to work in a hybrid work, in a hybrid work way, because things are probably not going back to exactly how they were, and hybrid work is here to stay. Now, it's time for you to get things in order for your business so you can be reliable to your team and reliably offer them flexibility in the way that they're working. We've been talking a lot about the Great Resignation, which means that for team members and staff that do not feel aligned with the business that they're a part of, whether that's due to remote work policies or other reasons, they're all just quitting. And so in order to retain talent, you want to make sure that you've actually got a good exchange with you and your team. And when it comes to the way that you work, how you work, when you work, where you work, the tools that you're using, these are all very important to your team to ensure that you're on the same page. Now, not only do you have the risk of losing talent if you don't have your business set up correctly, but you're also potentially going to have frictions that may affect productivity and also then translate to company culture. If your team don't have the right tools in their hands, they're going to be frustrated when they're trying to get basic work done, and that tends to radiate out to the rest of your team as well. So with the start of a new year and a new paradigm with the new way of working, well, we're ending lockdowns, we're ending border closures, we're coming back to some kind of normal way of working. It's time to do a bit of a reframe and hopefully get your team excited about moving the business forward. Now, I said there's 4 key ways, 4 key areas we're going to be talking about. Number 1 is team training. Number 2 is hardware. Number 3 is workspace setup. And number 4 is additional cloud-based tools to make sure you've got everything. We're going to start with team knowledge, and let's start talking about making sure your team has the right knowledge inside for them to be productive at work. Now, if your team have not actually spent the time learning how to use Google Workspace or other cloud tools in your business properly, well, their experience is probably going to be one of friction, and it's probably going to be higher than it needs to be, particularly if they've been thrust into working from home and all of a sudden they have to start using the collaboration tools to keep in touch with their team. They have to start using the communication tools to keep in touch with their team, where previously they were able to sit in the same office physically as someone and just kind of like lean over their desk and have a conversation. Well, your team are going to be struggling if they don't actually know how to use the tools properly. And so, how do you know if your team are actually on top of using these tools from Google or your other tools? You may not know what you don't know. It may be difficult for you to actually understand and see for your team what their level of competence is. Well, some warning signs that we can identify that we see when teams are not quite up to speed. Maybe they're sharing documents or sharing files via email still. That's like number 1 red flag. If your team are dropping things in an email and sending them over, that's an issue. Number 2, if they're using Google Chat for absolutely everything, or maybe they're not using Google Chat at all. Maybe they're still using email for internal communications, like trying to do project management via email. That's a big red flag for businesses. Or if there's complete overwhelm in your Google Chat as well, or chat channels, whatever chat channels you happen to be using, if it's Slack or WhatsApp or anything else. If you don't have a tidy Google Drive and your team are just sharing documents via the share button inside of Google, Google Docs and Google Spreadsheets, rather than actually putting files into the correct shared folders. And a important one on that is a quick red flag on that is like if the team are just like dropping documents into rooms inside of Google Chat just via the URL. That's one that's pretty obvious. And we also see as another really obvious red flag is non-standard file formats. So if your team are a Google business and you're using Google Workspace, but there's still those 1 or 2 people in the business who are using Microsoft format documents, so they're creating an Excel spreadsheet, or they're creating a PowerPoint presentation, or they're creating a Word doc instead of using the Google tools. That's the most obvious one that we see all the time. So how do we solve this? Well, it's pretty simple education, getting everyone on the same page, and making sure that you're training your team at the same time as well, so you can maximize we call it change management in our kind of tech world, consulting world, but you want to make sure that the adoption of the technology is as effective as possible. So ideally you want to have everyone actually going through the change at the same time. It's important for you to schedule this and actually make sure that your training session, whether it's delivered internally or externally, is actually delivered at the same time with everyone, and then make sure that there is actually some learning outcomes. You want to make sure, okay, well, what are the metrics for success? Well, the metrics for success might look like everything in Google Drive is nice and tidy. All of our file formats are uniform, and our naming conventions are uniform. We are using chat effectively. So we're no longer using internal emails for chatting about projects, but we're not completely overwhelmed by instant messaging tools. And you can work out those metrics with our team if you'd like, or you can work them out yourself. At the end of the day, if you're looking for support in this area, well, our team can actually help set up a set of training sessions to make sure that your team have all of the knowledge gaps plugged, and make sure that your team are productively using the tools that you have inside the business. If right now you don't have visibility over what's going on, well, this is a great way for you to work with us, because our team will actually help you to identify where the knowledge gaps are for your team, and then work to close them so your team can be much more productive. Next up, let's talk about hardware. Now, you may have just sent your team home with whatever hardware they happen to be using at the time when the pandemic hit. But unfortunately, what works in your office may not be the best for at home. It's really important to make sure that your team have the correct peripherals, screens, dedicated work area, making sure the ergonomics are correct, making sure they have a correct and solid internet connection that's actually reliable, making sure they have backup options, making sure that you have all of your things like security permissions in place, so they're not being held back by their work tools. Now, not only is this important from a productivity standpoint, but there are also real legal implications as well for business owners who don't provide an adequate workspace for their employees. And so we have a set of policies and procedures which we can share with you, which allow you to make sure that you are checking that your team have adequate workspaces at home. Now, unfortunately, not everybody is going to have a dedicated office or workspace. They may be working from a corner in the kitchen, or maybe even a corner in the bedroom. And so it's important for you to make sure that wherever your team are working, that not only is it a safe and a healthy environment for them as a worker inside your business, but also that it's going to give a good impression to your customers as well. We've all called a help desk or a call center and heard a million people in the background, or heard distracting background noise, or been on a Zoom meeting with someone and they've got kids screaming in the background, or something else going on like construction noise. And so ensuring that your team are all compliant with having not only a workspace that is healthy for them, but one that's also healthy for the business is extremely important. Now, one of the biggest risks here is actually getting your security permissions wrong inside an application like Google Workspace. Do you allow your team members to just download anything to their local computers willy-nilly? Have you enforced any security policies on the endpoints that your team are actually using? If you are not currently right now setting any policies inside of Google Workspace to protect your business data, well, it's very possible that you have business data floating around on someone's personal computer, and there's nothing stopping one of their kids from jumping in and, accidentally downloading the wrong file to the computer, or accidentally placing something inside your business Google Drive. And we've seen all of these kind of things happen, particularly when there's shared workspaces between a work machine and a personal space. And so the best thing to do there is to use the security and permissions features of Google Workspace to actually set some really basic policies to lock down individual devices. Now, they may be mobile devices, but also work laptops and computers as well. You can do things like enforce who has access and when and where. And you can also set up device authorizations so that anytime a new device is linked to an account, it actually has to go through an authorization process before it's able to get access to any company data. Now, it may also be worth updating your company policies on how home-based equipment is actually used. So you can ensure that you have the legal protection if someone does something silly, because your insurance is going to want to make sure that you have made reasonable steps to protect any business data and reasonable steps to make sure that your team are actually equipped correctly. Now, you may have to put aside a bit of budget for this. That's totally fine. Our team are able to help with it. Now, working with your team to make sure they have the best setup at home in terms of their hardware, instead of just leaving them to their own devices and making it their responsibility, not only is that going to help your team know that they are cared for and that they are important to the business, but it's also going to make sure that you have a fair exchange and that you've set a good expectation that when your team are working from home, it's still actually expected to be a professional work environment rather than the vibe of like a freelancey type gig where other work from home jobs have been in the past. So let's get into the details of actually ensuring your Google Workspace is set up. Now, if your Google account is not completely configured correctly, well, small issues can become great sources of friction. And again, with your team working at home, it's a lot harder to actually have visibility of exactly what's going on. Now, usually the kind of chatter that you would hear in an office just day to day is no longer available when you've got a hybrid work team. And so some of the challenges can be just keeping a finger on the heartbeat and the pulse of a business and how things are going. Now, many businesses are actually pivoting core product offerings, pivoting their core focus, but even the most organized businesses are finding that old ways of doing business when they were all in one place physically are now no longer working when teams are remote and distributed. And there's some real basic things that you need to make sure are correct in your workspace setup. Imagine if you didn't have your DNS settings configured correctly and some of your emails were going to spam. Now, normally that's the kind of thing that a coworker might mention in an office, but they might keep to themselves when they're working from home because the only one-on-one time they get with you as the business owner or business leader is limited. And what that can mean is that you're not actually finding out about these issues. Now, some of the other issues are the basic day-to-day productivity. I spoke earlier in the video about how you may know that your team are not yet using Google Workspace properly. Things like sharing documents via URL rather than actually putting them in a shared folder. When there's training gaps or structural gaps in how Google Workspace is configured, well, that's the time that it might be time to actually review your configuration and review your setup. Now, some really basic policies can be implemented to ensure that Google Workspace works for you. And if you're not yet utilizing all of the features like knowing when somebody is out of the office by using the out of office feature, or scheduling time in using your Google calendars so you can find times that suit everybody automatically, well, you may be missing out on some of the tools that make your life easier when you're not in the same office as everyone. Finally, visibility of your team is going to be one of the biggest challenges you'll face working with a hybrid solution and a hybrid way of working. Now, if you can't see what your team are actually doing, if you don't have effective task management set up, if you're just making phone calls to check up on people, or you're trying to hobble together different apps and pieces of software just to try and get your work done, well, you may struggle to have a home-based team. Now, for some businesses, they may have operated their project management and their team management by having a big whiteboard in the office with a list of key projects or a list of key initiatives or key clients or, accounts that you're trying to chase. But that kind of working doesn't work when you're remote. Now, the solution isn't micromanagement, which a lot of leaders will potentially default to, or constant checking in with your team. The solution is to use cloud-based business tools that have inbuilt task management, inbuilt project management that everyone can use, but they need to be tools that everyone actually wants to use. They can't feel like a chore to have to keep updated all the time. And they also need to have a good reporting capability as well, so you can manage by exception and manage by the numbers rather than micromanaging your team. So ideally for you as a business owner or business leader, you want to have insights, not just on the individual team members, on how they're going with the individual tasks and their level of resource availability, but also the overall health of your business. And so, one of those tools may be a dashboard tool, so you can see the data and analytics and actual, numbers-based information on the business. And another one is probably going to be some kind of task and collaborative project management tool. Now, again, it's no longer good enough to expect that you can just yell across the office and get projects done that way. If you've got team members working across different time zones, different locations, different days of the week, well, it's important that everyone has all task, strategy, and project information in one place so that you and your team at any point can look up a reference, but most importantly, so that you can actually manage the business effectively. Now, it can be challenging to know what tools and resources are the best for each business. There are thousands of tools out there, and many business owners get caught up in bright, shiny object syndrome by trying out a bunch of tools and finding that after they've implemented them or partially set them up, they don't quite catch on with their team. Now, we've been experts in helping literally tens of thousands of businesses implement cloud technology tools and help them get their teams productive, especially with Google Workspace, but also with a plethora of other tools in the Google ecosystem. Now, if you're a business with more than 10 employees, it can be challenging to know exactly which tools to use and how to implement them with your team. So it's probably worthwhile having a chat to our team to do a full systems audit and come up with a strategy for a truly productive hybrid workplace. If you'd like to do that, click on either the link below or put your details into the form on this page, and one of our consultants will be in touch with you shortly.